What if I told you that one of the greatest victories in history was won by an army that was barely standing? An army that was exhausted, hungry, and going nowhere, against a radiant, rested, and numerically superior enemy. This is not just a battle. It is a story of how the old world of knightly honor and heavy armor stumbled and drowned in the mud. This is the story of how ordinary soldiers, armed with long yew sticks, stopped the most formidable military force of their era. Watch the video to the end to find out how a narrow, soggy field in the French countryside marked the end of an era and why mud proved to be a more powerful weapon than the finest steel. I'll let you in on a secret that is rarely mentioned in textbooks. The campaign that led to Agincourt was the result not so much of strategy as of desperation. The young English king Henry IV landed in France with one goal in mind: to claim his right to the French throne. He believed in his divine right, but his campaign did not go according to plan from the very beginning. He was not a triumphant conqueror, but rather a gambler who had staked his entire kingdom on the outcome. The siege of the port city of Harfleur was the first serious test for the English. It dragged on for weeks, turning into an exhausting war of attrition. The city fell, but the price was enormous. Disease and exhaustion decimated the ranks of the English army. Soldiers who had arrived in full strength now struggled to move, suffering from ailments caused by poor conditions and lack of provisions. The victory at Harfleur felt almost like a defeat. With the onset of autumn, Henry's war council insisted on returning to England. Continuing the campaign deep into enemy territory with a weakened army was pure madness. Any sensible commander would have retreated to preserve what remained of his forces, but Henry V was not just a sensible commander. He was a man of deep faith and unyielding will. He refused to flee ingloriously by sea. Instead, he made a decision that historians still consider either genius or madness. He decided to lead his army overland through hostile Normandy to the English port of Calais. It was not a strategic maneuver, but rather an act of defiance against fate. The march on Calais was a demonstration of strength that Henry no longer possessed. He wanted to show France that the English king was not afraid to march through its lands. The distance was enormous, and time was working against the English. The French command, initially divided by internal strife, quickly realized its chance. While the English lion was wounded and weak, it could be easily hunted. A call to arms was issued throughout northern France. Lords and knights, forgetting their differences, rushed to intercept the insolent invader. The English army turned into a slowly crawling column of exhausted people. They marched under constant rain, which turned the roads into impassable mud. The soldiers were hungry, their clothes turned into rags. Every step was difficult, and behind them loomed the storm cloud of the French army. The French were in no hurry to engage in battle. They chose a different tactic, a tactic of attrition. They blocked the river crossings, forcing the English to make detours and lose precious time. They destroyed supplies along the English route. Each day of marching made the English army weaker and the French army stronger. Finally, at the Somme River, the English found themselves trapped. All the bridges and fords were either destroyed or guarded. Only thanks to their resourcefulness and a bit of luck did they manage to find an unguarded crossing and escape the trap. But this was only a temporary respite. The French army, huge and fresh, finally gathered together and blocked Henry's path to Calais. The two armies met at the small village of Agincourt. For the French, it was a moment of triumph. For the English, it was the end of the road. They had no choice but to fight a battle they could not win. Do you think Henry V's march was an act of incredible bravery or a fatal mistake that was only saved by a miracle? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other stories about great battles. What if everything you've been taught about medieval armies was called into question on a single battlefield? At Agincourt, it wasn't just two armies that clashed, but two completely different military philosophies. On one side were the cream of French knighthood, on the other, desperate English professionals. The difference in their equipment and tactics was enormous. The French army was the embodiment of feudal power. It consisted of thousands of knights clad in the latest and most expensive armor. It was the heyday of Gothic armor, full steel suits that made a warrior almost invulnerable to conventional weapons. Each suit of armor was a work of art and cost a fortune. These warriors were aristocrats for whom war was the meaning of life. They went into battle not so much for the king as for personal glory and honor. They were supported by thousands of infantrymen and crossbowmen. But it was the knights who were supposed to form the striking force and decide the outcome of the battle with one crushing blow. The problem with the French army was its overconfidence. They saw a handful of ragged rebels before them and had no doubt that victory would be swift. There were so many of them that, according to chroniclers, the field could not accommodate everyone who wanted to fight. Command was divided among several senior aristocrats, each of whom wanted his share of glory. The heavy armor, which was their pride and joy, had a downside. It was incredibly heavy. A full set of armor could weigh more than 30 kilograms. Moving around in such equipment on flat ground was exhausting, and on rough terrain, almost impossible. But at that moment, no one thought about that. The English army was almost the complete opposite. Its core consisted not of knights but of ordinary foot soldiers. These were free peasants and craftsmen whom the king hired for service in exchange for hard cash. Their main weapon was not a spear or a sword, but the English longbow. The longbow was a weapon that required incredible strength and years of practice. It was made from a single piece of yew wood and was as tall as a man. It took up to 150 pounds of force to draw such a bow. It was not an aristocratic weapon, but truly a weapon of the people, and the English were unmatched in their mastery of it. English archers were lightly clad. Many of them did not even have leather jackets, let alone steel armor. Their protection was their mobility and the deadly rapid-fire capability of their weapons. An experienced archer could fire up to 12 arrows per minute, turning the sky into a black cloud. In addition to archers, Henry also had heavily armored warriors known as men-at-arms or men-at-arms. They were dressed in armor similar to the French, but there were far fewer of them. They were supposed to be the steel backbone that would hold the formation together while the archers did their job. Thus, two concepts clashed on the battlefield: the French reliance on the heavy individual strike of steel-clad aristocrats and the English reliance on discipline, mass long-range combat, and the professionalism of commoners. Which tactic do you think was more modern for the 15th century? In the next chapter, we will see how a third, most formidable participant intervened in this dispute: the weather. What I am about to tell you was not a brilliant plan or a cunning tactic. It was pure geography. The location chosen for the battle became a more formidable enemy for the French than the entire English army. The field itself, on which the outcome of the campaign was to be decided, turned out to be the perfect trap. The battle took place in a narrow open space between two dense forests, Agincourt and Tramacourt. It was a natural corridor, no more than 1,000 meters wide. Henry V did not choose this place by chance. He understood that in such a narrow space, the numerical superiority of the French would be useless. The forests on the flanks provided reliable cover for the English army. The French could not flank it to strike from behind or surround the small enemy force. They had only one option left: a frontal attack on the English positions. This was exactly what the English king had been counting on. But the main ally of the English was not the forest, but the ground beneath their feet. It had been raining heavily for several weeks. The field chosen for the battle had recently been plowed. The soft clay mixed with water turned into viscous, sticky, and deep mud. For the English army, which stood still in defense, this was unpleasant but not critical. They had already taken up their position on the crest of a small slope. Most of their army consisted of lightly armed archers, who were not so dependent on the ground beneath their feet. For the French, however, this mud was a real curse. They were forced to attack, moving across this soggy field. Every step required enormous effort. Their feet sank into the slush up to their ankles, and in some places even deeper. Imagine a knight in 30 kilos of armor trying to walk across such a field. His steel boots, sabatons, were instantly sucked into the mud. To take the next step, he had to pull his foot out of the sticky trap, wasting precious energy. The French command completely ignored this factor. Their tactics involved a quick and decisive attack by heavy infantry, which was supposed to crush the English ranks. They did not take into account that their soldiers would reach the enemy completely exhausted. The narrowness of the field played another cruel joke on them. The huge French army could not deploy at full strength. Thousands of soldiers were forced to huddle together in a dense, deep mass. They got in each other's way, unable to maneuver. Thus, even before the battle began, the French found themselves at a disadvantage. They were forced to attack on a narrow stretch of land, knee-deep in mud, against an entrenched and prepared enemy. The battlefield, which was supposed to be the arena of their triumph, turned into a sticky trap. Henry V, looking at this, must have realized that he had been given a chance he should not have had. He placed his archers on the flanks, pushing them forward slightly so that they could fire crossfire at the advancing French masses. He ordered them to prepare a major surprise for the French knights. If you enjoyed this analysis of the tactical situation, don't forget to like this video. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how simple sticks changed the course of the battle? The armies stood facing each other for several hours. The French were in no hurry, confident that the hungry English would either surrender or attack and be killed. But Henry V took another risk. He ordered his army to move forward, closer to the enemy. This maneuver was incredibly daring. The English left their advantageous position and advanced deeper into the field, stopping at bowshot range. They did this to provoke the French into attacking. And as soon as they took up their new position, Henry gave an order that became one of the keys to victory. Each English archer carried not only a bow and arrows, but also a 2-meter-long stake sharpened at both ends. On the king's orders, thousands of these stakes were driven into the ground in front of the English positions. They were tilted toward the enemy, forming a kind of palisade or hedgehog. It was a simple but ingenious tactical invention. These stakes were intended to repel cavalry attacks. However, at Agincourt, they had another more important function. They became a physical and psychological barrier for the French infantry. The French command was enraged by such insolence. A handful of ragged men dared not only to meet them, but also to demonstratively entrench themselves on their land. Their patience ran out. The order was given to launch a general attack. The first line of French knights dismounted and moved forward. There were several thousand of them, the cream of the aristocracy, clad in the finest steel in Europe. They advanced in a dense wall, confident that their armor would protect them from any arrows, and that their onslaught would sweep away the flimsy English formation. But they immediately encountered two enemies, mud and time. The field, soggy from rain, instantly began to sap their strength. The heavy knights sank into the mire. Their formation broke. The swift attack turned into a slow, exhausting slog through the sticky swamp. The closer they got to the English positions, the deeper the mud became. They walked, breathing heavily, cursing the weather in this cursed field. Ahead of them awaited not only English swords, but also a palisade of thousands of sharp yew stakes. This palisade forced the French to slow down even more. They had to either try to get around it or break it, which was impossible under fire. This created a bottleneck, further compacting their ranks. The English waited silently. Their bows were drawn, their arrows at the ready. They allowed their enemies to get bogged down in the mud, to get close enough that every shot would be deadly. The tension hung in the air. How would you feel standing in the place of an English archer at that moment? In the next chapter, you will find out what happened when the command fire was given. The decisive moment had arrived. The French vanguard, exhausted from crossing the sticky field, finally entered the zone of destruction. Thousands of knights huddled together in a dense, uncontrollable mass, presented the perfect target, and then Henry V gave the order his archers had been waiting for. At the signal, thousands of English and Welsh archers drew their bows simultaneously. The sound that rang out at that moment was not like the sound of a shot, but like the rumble of tearing fabric. Thousands of arrows soared simultaneously into the gray autumn sky. For a moment, it seemed as if the sun had been eclipsed by a dark cloud. It was the first of many arrows. An experienced archer could shoot 10 to 12 arrows per minute. Henry's army had at least 5,000 archers. This meant that up to 60,000 arrows rained down on the French ranks every minute. The French were stunned. They had expected to be shot at, but not on this scale. It was not just shooting, it was a steel rain. Arrows fell on them from above, finding vulnerable spots in their excellent armor. Although full plate armor was almost invulnerable to direct hits, there were still gaps. The arrows pierced the visors, hit the joints of the armor under the armpits and elbows, striking the parts that were less well protected. Special arrows with bodkin tips were used, narrow and sharp awls designed specifically to pierce armor. But even when the arrows did not pierce the armor, their effect was terrifying. The impact of a heavy arrow fired from a powerful bow was capable of knocking a man off his feet. Knights already barely standing in the mud fell, dragging their neighbors with them. The barrage came not only from the front, but also from the flanks. Archers standing in the woods struck the French in the side. This created crossfire from which there was no escape. French knights instinctively huddled even closer to the center, trying to take cover behind each other. This maneuver proved fatal. Instead of spreading out, the French army was compressed into a single, panicked mass. The front ranks could not retreat because of the pressure from behind, and the rear ranks could not advance because of the chaos in front. They found themselves locked in a deadly trap. The mud completed the job. Fallen knights could not get up. The weight of their own armor turned them into helpless prisoners. Mud clogged the cracks in their helmets, making it difficult to breathe. The attack faltered before it even began. The English archers continued their methodical work. They closed the distance, sticking their arrows into the ground in front of them to speed up reloading. They saw the chaos that was unfolding in the enemy ranks, and it gave them strength. The steel avalanche of French knights was stopped by simple wooden arrows. Guess what happened when the archers ran out of arrows? After several devastating volleys that turned the French vanguard into a chaotic mass, the English began to run out of arrows. The French attack was broken, but not yet defeated. The most desperate and powerful knights still managed to reach the English positions. Close combat began. This is where the English men-at-arms, heavily armored warriors standing between groups of archers, were supposed to come into play. They closed ranks and prepared to meet the remnants of the French attack. But something unexpected happened. Instead of retreating to the rear, the English archers threw down their bows. These lightly armed soldiers were furious. They grabbed whatever was at hand: swords, axes, hammers, and even the hatchets they used to drive in stakes. Using their mobility, the archers rushed into the thick of battle. It was an incredible sight. Thousands of men in simple jackets and without armor attacked knights clad in steel. And oddly enough, they had a decisive advantage. That advantage was mud. The French knights who reached the English lines were completely exhausted. They could barely lift their weapons, gasping for breath after crossing the sticky field. Their heavy armor, which was supposed to protect them, became their prison. The English archers, on the other hand, were light and fast. They glided through the mud while the knights sank into it. They attacked in groups, 3 or 4 of them, pouncing on a single knight. They did not try to pierce the armor. They simply knocked their opponents off their feet. A knight in full armor who fell into deep mud was completely helpless. He could not get up on his own. The weight of the steel pulled him down, and the sticky sludge prevented him from finding support. He could only watch helplessly as his opponents ran up to him. English soldiers methodically took out one knight after another. They used misericordia daggers, thrusting them into the gaps in helmets and armor joints. It was not a battle, but a methodical effort to neutralize the enemy. The French aristocracy, the cream of the nation, found themselves paralyzed. They were too heavy for this field. Their strength, their armor, their status, all of this proved useless against simple yeomen armed with hammers and knives. The English men-at-arms, including King Henry himself, who fought in the front ranks, completed the rout. They drove back the few who could still fight. The first line of the French army ceased to exist as an organized force. Do you think that technology, light weapons, always defeats brute force, heavy armor? In the next chapter, we will see that the French still had reserves. The defeat of the first wave of the French attack was obvious to everyone on the field. However, the French army was so large that it still had a second line in reserve. It consisted of the same number of knights and warriors as the first, and now they prepared to enter the fray. The commanders of the second line gave the order to advance, hoping that their fresh forces would be able to turn the tide of battle. They moved forward, but immediately encountered the same problem as their predecessors: the mud. The field, already trampled by thousands of feet, became even more impassable. But now there was a new, even more formidable obstacle: The path to the second line was blocked by the remnants of the first. They had to literally walk over the bodies of their comrades, trying to get around groups of fallen but still living knights who were stuck in the mud. This created incredible chaos. Instead of attacking as a united front, the second line broke up into separate units. They lost their formation, bypassing piles of people and equipment. English archers, having gathered arrows on the field, resumed firing, causing even more confusion. The morale of the second line was undermined even before they reached the English positions. They saw what had happened to the vanguard. They saw the cream of knighthood floundering helplessly in the mud while being finished off by commoners. When they finally met the English line, they were as exhausted as the first wave. They did not have the strength for a decisive attack. The English, encouraged by their initial success, met them with fierce resistance. The battle turned into a huge, chaotic melee. The narrow space prevented the French from using their numerical advantage. Warriors from the rear ranks pushed against those in front, preventing them from fighting and creating incredible crowding. In this crush, heavy armor once again became a disadvantage. The soldiers were squeezed so tightly that they could not even raise their arms to strike. They were immobilized by their own weight. The English, who stood more freely, were able to deliver short and accurate blows. The second line's attack faltered just as the first had. They were unable to break through the English formation. Suffering heavy losses and seeing the futility of their efforts, the soldiers of the second line began to waver. Their retreat was as chaotic as their attack. They mingled with the remnants of the first line, trying to escape from this sticky hell. The field in front of the English was littered with thousands of immobilized or retreating French soldiers. While the first and second lines of the French army were dying in the mud, a few hundred meters away, on fresh ground, stood the third and largest line. It consisted mainly of mounted knights in the rear guard. They were fresh, full of strength, and watched the unfolding disaster. They were expected to deliver the decisive blow. If this mass of horsemen had attacked the exhausted English, the outcome of the battle could have been very different. But they did not move. Their inaction sealed the fate of the entire army. There were several reasons for this. First, the commanders of the third line were stunned by what they saw. Before their eyes, 2/3 of the army had been crushed by a handful of Englishmen. They saw the kingdom's elite helplessly stuck in the mud. Second, they understood that attacking on horseback across such a field would be pure suicide. If knights on foot couldn't get through, what chance did heavy war horses have? They would simply get stuck within the first 100 meters, becoming easy targets for archers. Thirdly, the French camp was in complete disarray. There was virtually no unified command. While the aristocrats in the front ranks argued about who would be the first to attack, no one bothered to coordinate with the reserves. While the third line hesitated, the battle was effectively over. Seeing that the main threat had passed, the English began to gather prisoners. This was the most profitable part of any medieval battle. Before them lay a field strewn with French aristocracy, dukes, counts, barons. Thousands of France's most noble men were either immobilized or ready to surrender. For the English soldiers, this was unheard of wealth. Seeing that the battle was lost and not wanting to share the shameful fate of the first two lines, the French rear guard simply turned around and left the battlefield. They left their comrades at the mercy of the victors. The English could not believe their eyes. The army that outnumbered them several times over, which was supposed to destroy them, had simply vanished. Henry V had won a victory that no one could have foreseen. Silence reigned on the field, broken only by moans and orders in English. The scale of the disaster for France was unimaginable. The English, tired but victorious, stood as masters on this terrible field. The English king himself, who had fought all day, was unharmed. He proved his right to leadership not only with words but also with deeds. His desperate march ended in one of the most resounding victories in English history. Agincourt was not just another battle in the 100 Years' War. This event became a symbol, a watershed that marked the end of an entire era, the era of chivalry. What happened on that muddy field forever changed the rules of warfare. For centuries, heavily armed knights had been the backbone of European armies. They were not just warriors, they were symbols of power, status, and military might. All tactics were built around them. It was believed that armored cavalry or dismounted knights were invincible. At Agincourt, this paradigm collapsed. It turned out that the most expensive and protected warrior could be completely helpless under certain conditions. His armor, which cost a fortune, became his shroud. His strength turned against him. The winner of this battle was not an aristocrat, but a commoner. An English yeoman archer, a man of low birth, armed with a simple yew-bow, proved his superiority. He was mobile, disciplined, and deadly at a distance. It was a victory of tactics over status. Henry V used a combined army, where each element performed its own function. Archers weakened the enemy, pikes stopped the onslaught, and heavy infantry held the line. The French, on the other hand, relied on brute force and individual valor, which led to their disaster. Agincourt showed that armor was no longer absolute protection. Armorers responded to this challenge by making armor even thicker and stronger. But this only exacerbated the problem of mobility. Ultimately, this led to the emergence of firearms, against which armor was powerless. France was decapitated. In a single battle, it lost a huge part of its aristocracy. The Constable of France, 3 dukes, 5 counts, and thousands of other nobles were killed or taken prisoner. This had long-term political and social consequences for the country. The battle also demonstrated the importance of leadership. Henry V was with his soldiers, sharing all their hardships and fighting in the front lines. The French command, on the other hand, was divided, and their soldiers had no common goal. It was not only a military victory, but also a psychological one. The myth of invincible knighthood was dispelled. It became clear that on the battlefield, discipline, tactics, and proper use of the terrain meant more than noble birth. Agincourt had a huge impact on military art. It accelerated the decline of feudal armies and stimulated the development of professional, standing armies. War was becoming a craft, not a privilege. It is symbolic that knighthood was buried not by the sword or spear, but by mud and arrows. Nature itself rebelled against the outdated way of waging war. The era of heavy cavalry was coming to an end, giving way to infantry and archers. Immediately after the Battle of Agincourt, the English army did not pursue the retreating enemy. The victory had been too hard won, and the men too exhausted to continue fighting. The soldiers stood knee-deep in mud, surrounded by the dead and wounded, under incessant rain. Many could not believe they were still alive. Of the 7,000 Englishmen, almost a third were wounded, but their spirit was unshakable. Henry V ordered that the wounded be gathered first, the camp be put in order, and the thousands of prisoners be taken care of, among whom were dozens of French nobles and several of the kingdom's most distinguished dignitaries. Henry understood that his army was too small to risk another battle. He decided that the most important thing now was to reach the safe walls of Calais, the English stronghold on the continent. The retreat began, but it was not a flight, as it had been the day before, but a triumphant march of victors. Every step was accompanied by the realization that they had accomplished the impossible. France, upon learning of the defeat at Agincourt, was plunged into shock. News of the catastrophe spread faster than messengers. It was carried by pilgrims, merchants, and even fleeing soldiers. The country, already exhausted by the civil war between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, suddenly realized that it had been left without an army. The cream of the knighthood had perished. Dukes, counts, marshals, those who were supposed to defend the crown. When Henry V returned to England, he was greeted as a living saint. In London, the streets were decorated with flags and bells rang for several days in a row. Crowds gathered to see the hero who, with a small army, had defeated proud France. The chronicles of the time wrote that the people greeted him with cries of Deo gratias, glory to God. The victory at Agincourt united England, giving it confidence and pride. However, the consequences of the battle went far beyond military glory. It changed the political map of Europe. Weakened and humiliated, France was forced to sit down at the negotiating table. The result was one of the most humiliating documents in its history, the Treaty of Troyes of 1420. According to it, the French king Charles VI, who was suffering from insanity, recognized Henry IV not only as an ally, but as his heir and regent of France. His own son, the Dauphin Charles, was deprived of his rights to the throne. This meant that after the death of Charles VI, The crowns of England and France were to be united under the rule of Henry and his descendants. To cement this alliance, Henry married the French king's daughter, Catherine of Valois. The marriage was a solemn, almost mythical symbol of the reconciliation of the two great powers. To contemporaries, it seemed like the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy about a single monarch of the West. It seemed that the dream of Edward III, who started the 100 Years' War, had finally come true. By this time, Henry V was at the height of his power. His army controlled Normandy, his authority was recognized in Paris, and his dynasty was preparing to rule a united kingdom. But history rarely favors those at the top. Just 2 years later, Henry suddenly fell ill, according to some sources, with dysentery, according to others, with malaria contracted during the Siege of Meaux, and died at the age of 35. His death shook England and destroyed the fragile balance of power. He left behind an infant, Henry VI, who was destined to become king of two crowns but did not possess his father's strength. This marked the beginning of the end of English rule in France. Weakened by internal strife, England was unable to hold on to its conquests. France, led by Joan of Arc and a revived spirit of resistance, began its slow but inevitable revival. But that is a completely different story. Agincourt will forever remain in Europe's memory as a lesson. War is won not only by numbers, but also by discipline, training, spirit, and the right choice of position. It became a symbol of a new era, an era when the bow defeated armor, when simple foot soldiers proved stronger than the aristocracy. This battle went down in history as the victory of the archer, as the triumph of courage and wit over the blind code of chivalry. Agincourt proved that war no longer belonged to the nobility. Its outcome was decided not by pedigree, but by intelligence and organization. It was a bloody, dirty, and terrible lesson that Europe would ponder for centuries to come. The legacy of Agincourt is not only the glory of English arms, it is a reminder of the fragility of human pride, of how chance, nature, and the will of one man can turn the fate of a continent upside down. Even the rain, the mud, and the weight of the knight's armor mattered. This is the essence of great battles. They show that there are no trifles in history, and each of them can become a turning point where despair turns into greatness. We have followed Henry V's army on its desperate journey and seen how a hopeless situation turned into a resounding triumph. Agincourt is not just a battle, it is a drama about the clash between the old and the new, about how technology, tactics, and nature itself can break centuries-old traditions. Mud and arrows prove stronger than steel and knightly honor. This battle showed that the outcome of a battle is decided not by nobility of blood, but by discipline, intelligent calculation, and a willingness to adapt to circumstances. It was one of the last nails in the coffin of the classical Middle Ages. What other great battles of the past would you like us to analyze? Perhaps you are interested in Hannibal's cunning at Cannae or the steel resolve of the Spartans at Thermopylae. Write your suggestions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes.